And welcome to another edition of Doug Wilson and Friends. This is Doug.
Hi.
And we're some friends. This is the special Pilgrim and Indian edition of Doug Wilson and Friends. And we've just got a whole lot of different things that we're going to do today. For one, it's C.S. Lewis's death day. So 60 years ago, Lewis met Jesus face to face. And so we might talk a little bit about that. It is the day before Thanksgiving. And but we'll begin with really the most pressing matter, which is that Nancy continues her upward trend in virality.
Yes.
You know, she made Newsweek.
She made Newsweek.
And
yes.
how is she? It's not going to her head, is it?
No, I don't think she's read the article. She's been told about it.
She's been told about the Newsweek article. Yeah, and
she may have read it by now. I don't know.
Yeah, but everything's still going up there.
Everything's going great, and the rest of the family is quite jealous.
Good, you guys have good. And we are joined today by James White, all the way from sunny Arizona.
Hey, James.
It is not sunny here, but it is sunny there. How you doing, James?
Well, the sun has actually set here, so but yeah, it's actually tomorrow. The high on Friday is supposed to be in the 60s, which upper 60s, but for us is like it's break out the jackets. It's great. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Up here, when the sun goes down, it affects the temperature.
Well, yeah, it does here too. Not so much during the summer, but now it is really nice. I'm actually heading out on Friday on a 3-week road trip in my RV, and I want to again extend the invitation to you all. When the regime precludes you from flying and traveling because of your beliefs, you know how to get hold of me. I can give you all the tips you need to continue your traveling abilities in the wonderful RV world. So just keep me in mind.
All right.
Why would you leave Arizona when it was 70 degrees? That seems like the time that you would want to be there.
It'll actually get me in the holiday spirit to be the first night. I'll be at like 7,000 feet, and the low will be in the 20s. And hey, that'll be great. I'm actually looking forward to that because I know I'm not going to be staying in that forever.
That's true.
That's the difference. No, that's the difference. I'm not going to be staying until March.
That's
so
right.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, let's take as our first topic today the great sort. Doug, Monday, you had a penny drop last week and then brought it out for us about this idea of what's underneath some of our social realignments.
Right.
So maybe give us the synopsis there of what penny dropped.
Yeah. The penny dropped is I've said for years that we're in a battle over editorial control of the dictionary, and the thing that occurred to me is what crucial word there was that we're battling over, and that is the definition of insanity. What is it to be insane? And for the Christian, insanity is arguing with the way the world is, right? And for the subjectivist, insanity is denying your innermost feelings, the way you feel. If you deny yourself, if you retard or bridle or squelch or insult your own passions, then all sorts of psychological mayhem is supposed to result from that. So for the subjectivist, insanity is denying yourself. For the Christian, insanity is not denying yourself. Right. It's pretty fundamental.
Right. Yeah. What's interesting about that is the way that this month has kind of unfolded. This we don't plan everything. We just kind of ride the waves. And we began with sort of the cruelty of empathy sort of discussion a few weeks ago, and then this sort of parenting thing
careened into it.
Yeah, careened into it. And it just seems like, and from our perspective, I've had people kind of hollering at me online about, just take the L, man. Like, you guys, you spoke stupid, you're acting dumb, what you're saying, crazy, evil stuff. Just take the L. And I'm going, I don't think we're actually losing here. I think that this is what winning looks like. Right. So, but maybe talk a little bit more about the coalescing there of that kind of the feelings run the show and the culture, and then the parenting thing. Those seem to be providentially aligned for the month of November.
Yeah, I don't want to. You have a thought?
No,
I
go
wanna
ahead.
interrupt your thought. But on the parenting thing, the first thing was it's shocking to me the kind of things that take off. So I thought, like, we're talking about spanking. Like, what? This is not. This is like bread and butter. And it's sometimes I'm afraid I live in my own bubble. Like I am on the internet, but I'm like, are we really getting this many? Are these many people getting riled up about what my sweet grandmother like would have been all for? Like this doesn't make any. This is wild. But I'm working on another piece right now called Nation of Bastards, which and there's a Pew Research study that came out a few years back that said 40% of the American children born are born out of wedlock, which is by definition what it means to be a bastard. And then Hebrews says, if you're left without chastisement, ye are bastards and not sons. And I thought, well, how fitting. I mean, if 40% of our nation's children don't have a father, right, and they don't have discipline, then to have someone talk about discipline is not going to comport with reality. Now, why do you discipline? Well, because reality is reality. Like, we love you, little one, and if you go out into the street, we can tell you what's going to happen, right? And the little kid doesn't understand that that's what's going to happen. So you have to train the child to have him comport with reality, with creation, the way that it really is. And if your commitment's to this other one that Doug was talking about, well, what reality is really about is the way that I feel. Then there actually is no way to discipline. You will never be able to discipline a child if that's your definition.
And you'll never be able to do anything else, actually.
Right. Yeah. You can. What's interesting is how you can see the two trajectories. It seems to me like if you go to any major metro in the U.S., and there's particular ones that are farther along, but if you go to the heart of San Francisco or to Portland or Philadelphia or whatever, you go down there, you're going to find a whole bunch of people whose passions just got to go wherever they wanted, right? They got appeased, coddled, and they're still appeased and coddled. There's no consequences, right? So the law and order problem in a lot of major metros is just we're not going to actually discipline anyone for bad behavior,
peeing on the sidewalk.
And so there you see the end result. And then, meanwhile, it's just hilarious to me the number of people who are still convinced that, say, Rachel is harboring some deep, trauma because Nancy spanked her. And then I think the thing
I can't believe they're questioning the victim.
Right, I know, right? Yeah, I didn't think that was allowed. But it does seem like that great sort is really a thing. It's really shifted. So, James, I'd be curious, in the circles you run in. Do you see the same sort of like shifting of alignment or people moving based on this sort of stuff?
Well, I can guarantee you one thing. I got into a huge amount of trouble. I mean, almost Doug Wilson level trouble, which is tough to do, actually, personally. But I got into Doug Wilson level trouble 7.5 years ago. I cannot believe this. It seems like yesterday. 7.5 years ago, I was driving home and I had just installed one of these video things on the front end of my windshield. So, record stuff in case you get into an accident, stuff like that. And this young black kid walked in front of my vehicle at a major intersection. I was the first vehicle in line. So he's in the intersection. His pants are pretty much around his knees. And right as he's crossing in front of me, a cop car crosses in front of me as well. And my camera catches this kid waiting for the cop car to go by, and then he flips the officer off as he's going by. And then he goes and throws some stuff on the sidewalk and stuff like that. It was a 530-word Facebook article that I posted along with the video. That's all it was. And all I pointed to was, here's a young man who hates authority, who is expressing that in public, and in all probability, this is what led up to it. And I was dealing with the reality. 40%, you said 40% for America, but in the black community, it's significantly higher than that.
Yeah.
And I said, it's the breakdown of family. This is the answer. We are running around with our hair on fire, looking at everything except what would make sense in God's world. The explosion at even suggesting, and I wasn't the first person to do this, obviously, But the idea of a white guy, especially with the last name of White, suggesting
Doubly damned there, James.
big time.
It's a little too on the nose. I think the writers needed
He's got
to take
a white beard, too.
Yeah, right?
Goodness.
Yeah, I know, but to even suggest to think of cause and effect in a way that makes sense in God's world rather than the victim mentality, everything else. 7.5 years ago, like I said, their response was pretty much what you all got for spanking people this past month or so. It was incredible. So nothing has changed. Some of the people that led that attack, you now look at them 7.5 years later. It's amazing where they've gone. And I just keep wondering, how far can we keep going?
Yeah.
Where is the bottom? And what sound do we make when we hit it? Will we know?
Right.
I'm not even sure.
Well, for some of them, there's the cultural level, the external level, in the external world, and then there's the spiritual level. I believe that the free fall that a lot of these people are in, there's never going to be a sound because it's the bottomless pit. It's the outer darkness. That's the path of damnation. Culturally, there's got to be a bottom, right? In the long run,
Because God is kind.
because God is kind, and in the long run, stupidity doesn't work. And this is so manifestly stupid that at some point somebody's going to step in and say, "Oh, okay, everybody out of the pool. We're not going to do this anymore." And weird, freaky things happen, like Argentina electing a libertarian.
Right.
On the
The
upside,
most awesome sideburns that I've ever seen in my entire life.
That's right. Like
That's right.
serious
Out of the
sideburns.
1800s right there.
On the upside, this is just like I know, I for one, if you're kind of a guy that doesn't have a lot of talent, you're grateful for when it gets like this crazy because you're like, you don't have to do a lot to really win. Like right now, this is a great playing field if you can just do the basic things. If you do know, that water runs downhill, those kinds of things. And as we cultivate, I was thinking about this with the thing with Rachel, and Rachel's talked a lot about emotional self-control, which is not exactly a disease that a lot of people have caught at this time. But if you have that, do you know how well suited you are for our times? I was thinking about, just read about JL. Where are the women that have the self-control, emotional self-control of JL, right? He shows up and you can say,
She's like, I got
come,
some milk
drink
for you.
some of my milk.
Right.
I'm for you, right? Who has the emotional self-control to deceive him in a godly way, and then to hold the tent peg,
Right.
I mean, that's someone who has been trained, And I thought, well, praise the Lord, because that's the kind of ladies that we're raising up, and there you go.
Yeah, well, just bringing Lewis into it, I was reflecting, Abolition of Man is sort of like the book that keeps on giving in these days, that hideous strength. But in that book, he says, the old view of education was that, to train, what people objected not just to spanking, but specifically to spanking based on emotional response. Right. So I saw a bunch of people saying things like, it's okay to spank for behavior. If they're running into the street, sure, give them a spank if they run away, do something like that. But to discipline because she was sad, or to discipline because she was grumpy when mom showed up, is bad. And Lewis notes in that book that the older view of education was specifically the training of the emotions. It was the emotions that had to be trained, because the little human animal will not at first have the right responses to reality. It won't like what it should like, and it won't hate what it should hate. And so the teacher, it needs to inculcate that, and he compares it to, it's like older birds teaching younger birds how to fly, which means you have to be an older bird. You have to have it in order to export it. You can't be flying off the handle and then give emotional self-control. And so this is just like so Lewis is seeing this, Chesterton's dealing with this, but they're dealing with it, I think, at the academic, at some level, at the academic level, right? It's in the Green Book. It's in the newspapers.
Seed form.
Yes, seed form. It wasn't widespread in sort of the cultural rot hadn't fully set in. I remember talking to a friend who says, people have always been, for the last 50, 100 years, conservatives have been concerned about the commies taking over. And he said, but what changed was, for a long time, it was people raising the, flag about the commies in the universities, or the commies, hidden in the government, or wherever, the subjectivists were in these key positions of power. But there was still a lot of residual Christendom in the populace.
Right.
And now we're getting to the point where that residual Christendom isn't there anymore, and we're getting the fruit of what they were doing in the universities and the schools and in the homes and things like that.
The fruit of the K through 12 indoctrination, yes.
Right. So here's the next question then. Given that there's this sort of sorting happening based on, James, your story about, making an observation which ought to be relatively unobjectionable but wasn't, and then Nancy going viral. So things are sorting based on, and there's sort of the two big groups, the people who know what the fight's about, and then Doug, you talked about that group in the middle who's still figuring it out, but who are often resistant to tipping too far either way. How does that sorting relate to the more traditional sorting that we're accustomed to based on doctrinal differences? So things like, James, you're a Baptist, Presbyterians, and so that sort of thing, or the charismatic and cessationists, or just or Anglican Presbyterian, or whatever. So these more traditional theological, what does the Bible teach about X? And we have a denomination or a church that's separate, maybe friendly, but hopefully friendly, but separate. How do we intersect those two ways of sorting things? Does it do anything to it? Is it just an additional sort, or does it scramble the old sort?
Right now, it seems to me that there is, and I've always attributed it honestly to the reality of judgment taking place in our land. But maybe as you get older, things change in how you recall the past. But it just seemed to me that there was significantly less willingness to divide over even petty issues than there is today. I almost describe it as we've become brittle, and you put pressure on something that has been made brittle by heat or something like that, and it shatters. And we're seeing divisions in places we should not be seeing divisions in.
Right.
There should be, you would think that the presence of the Spirit and the love of the brethren and a common love for God's word, something along those lines, would keep us all together in some fashion. And yet I'm seeing willingness. Well, I'm seeing an unwillingness to even listen to what somebody else is saying, almost as if, well, this person may be a Christian, and so therefore, if they say this, that's dangerous for me to hear. And it's almost a fundamentalistic mindset, even amongst people that are Reformed and shouldn't have that as a part of their background. And I can't necessarily tell you that I know exactly where it's coming from, but I know that it's making it harder and harder to try to tell people we need to remain focused on the big main issues that are the subject of where the world's going. Doug was just talking about control the dictionary, the attack on language, the necessity for everyone to recognize that emotions are not the basis of how we are to act and behave. All of this stuff, it's making it harder and harder to make that clarion call because there's so much distraction. There's so much willingness to go other directions. And I'm not really sure exactly where it's coming from, but it seems to be not just in our culture, but it's definitely come into the church in a big, big way. And I, as an apologist, my program is called The Dividing Line. Well, you're always divided. You're divisive, blah, blah, blah. The dividing line back then, honestly, when we started, the dividing line is, who is Jesus? Is he the Alpha and Omega? Is he truly God? And has God actually spoken? That was enough of a dividing line. That was, that would sort things out pretty well. Not anymore. I'd be interested in your thoughts as to whether you see more of that today, or, and this is possible, is it just because we're doing stuff like we're doing right now, which we could not do 30 years ago? Mm-hmm. I mean, we just did not have the ability to interact with each other across distances, across the globe. We didn't have that social media stuff. Is that just exacerbating? Is it making it look worse than it actually is, I'm not sure.
I would throw a couple of books in here. One would be Machen's Christianity and Liberalism, and the other would be, I think the title is Revival and Revivalism by Ian Murray.
Yep.
And Ian Murray points out the ecumenical spirit that crossed denominational lines in
First Great Awakening.
in the First Great Awakening. The Congregationalists and
Baptists, Presbyterians, were all-
Anglicans and stuff. And the thing that united them was they were evangelical. Right? They knew what the gospel was, and they knew that it was sort of the kind of hot gospel that a fundamentalist preacher in a Flannery O'Connor short story would preach on a street corner. It was straight up the middle, blood-bought sinners repent,
Believe
basic gospel. And the thing that you're pointing to, James, I see the same thing happening in the brittle shattering of conservative churches that are not woke. You know, it's like there's the big sort, the great sort that's happening out there between believers and non-believers. And then within the conservative church, we're fragmenting over things that we shouldn't be fragmenting over. And at the same time, I see the kind of ecumenical spirit that J. Gresham Machen displayed when evangelicals in all the denominations that were fighting the modernists, they knew this was a much bigger threat, and so they united in order to fight the threat. I think we're in a comparable situation today, almost identical, and some of the conservative believers are doing that, and some of the conservative believers are still fighting for turf territory and name recognition and clicks and whatever.
Yeah, I'd second everything that you all just said and just underscore how important I think it is that we figure out how to fight well in this season. So I remember you wrote something a few years back, Doug. I remember reading it and chuckling it because I was still a Baptist. You said Baptists are great because they still know how to fight. I was like, that's true. He understands. And you were lamenting like softy Kuyperians who go liberal. And you said something like you watch these French shows because topless French shows and talk about how the lighting is or something, when you just don't have anything left to fight for. And if you look at American evangelicalism, I think that's really the landscape. You have a soft liberal Christians that aren't going to fight for anything. They're gone woke. They've all that. And you've got the anti-woke people that are they going to be able to group together? Like, or is it just going to be, infighting? And I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. Like, it seems like I'm really only friends and partners with people that know how to fight. So that's my group. And so my concern is like, are we going to be able to actually like team up, unify, and fight the real bad guy? Do we even know how to do that kind of theological triage to know, hey, that's not something you should be fighting over, And it's weird. It's like people, to bring up yet another bugbear. I was recently asked by a guy, do you disavow federal vision? And I remember thinking, do you want me to disavow something I've never avowed? Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like, there's these weird, there's these weird things, and it's like you're over there doing this weird dance in the corner, grumpy, and we've actually got to find a way to recalibrate and get everybody knowing where the real bad guys are.
Yeah. Do you think? There's the fighting element, but part of I think the question that a lot of people are having is like, can you build something together, right? So like uniting over a common enemy is one thing, right? So when the orcs come, all of the infighting among the Rohirrim sort of fades, and everybody mans the ramparts, in theory. But it's sort of then in the meantime, we're not just fighting. We're also trying to build. And I think some of the old habits are, how do you build when you do have differences, and differences that matter? So like the differences baptism, the differences over baptism, differences over other aspects of ecclesiology, which are things that are basically how do you interpret the Bible, and there's the divisions that come from that. And then this sort of undercurrent thing that's like the Machen Christianity and liberalism is something that's kind of running under the surface of all of those typical divisions, right? So you could have a Baptist, you have two Baptists who fall out on completely different sides of the do feelings run the day, the woke stuff. You could have two Presbyterians fall out. You could have two Anglican. Yeah. So all underneath that, the typical divisions is this other thing. And the question is, as you discover that you're on as the thing cracks up and you're on an ice floe with a bunch of people that before you would have been in different churches, different networks, you wouldn't have even been at the same conferences because you'd had your own little world. Now all of a sudden you're realizing, hey, we're like the last two guys, we're the last five guys, we're the group here that's remaining faithful, that's not getting suckered in by all of this nonsense. The question is, okay, we can fight together. Can you build together? What can you build together? What can you not build together? In other words, do the old divisions, do they still have a relevance in terms of how much partnership you can do?
Yeah, I would say, you can build together, but everything rides on what it is you're building. So if a Baptist and a Presbyterian can fight the woke hordes, we all know what fighting is, and we can identify the culprit, the enemy, and we would fight the same way and for the same reasons. A Baptist and a Presbyterian minister could also easily have lunch together every month and just fellowship and good fellowship and trade stories from the churches and everything. But if they decided to plant a church together, they would have to decide what to do with the babies. Right? You have to, and that is a complicated theological issue. And so I'm going to throw in like a 2 cheers for denominationalism here.
Right.
It delights me that I could be welcome to preach in a church that I could not join. Right? I couldn't join, and they wouldn't let me join, and they would be happy to let me fill the pulpit.
Yep.
And it would delight me to be able to do the same with someone whose conscience would not permit him to join our church, but he could bring the word. So basically, what can you build together? Well, I think we should strive to build as much as we possibly can. In Ephesians 4, labor to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace.
Right.
As far as you can go. But it shouldn't frustrate us that we can't go all the way. We're not at the eschaton yet.
Right. So,
and of course, when we get there, a lot of these divisions aren't going to exist. Everyone's going to agree on Hebrews 8, and
there won't be any there won't be any babies. It'll be a moot point.
No, but obviously, I mean, I remember so well, and Doug, I don't think I've ever told you the story. I remember so well when Jeff Neal asked me to meet him at a local. It's called Metro Center. They just closed it, sadly, but it used to be the place to go. And we had lunch, and he told me about this newfangled thing called the CREC, which I'd never heard of before. And he was talking about becoming involved with this, and I was like, they're going to do what? They're going to Baptist, Presbyterian, what? How are they going to do that? What's this all about? And that was many, many years ago. And obviously, you've had to wrestle with all sorts of things as a result of that, and probably would do things differently now than maybe you did back at the beginning. You've learned things hopefully along the way. Yeah. But in the process, obviously everyone that's been involved has had to start recognizing what really is important in what drives a church to do what it's going to do, to build the things that the church it needs to be building, to make the positive ministries happen. Where is the small c Catholicity, and then where is we need to have division at that point. We can then get together and cooperate on these big things, but there needs to be room for conscience as well at this particular time in church history.
Sure.
And I think there's a fear of that. I know I certainly wasn't raised that perspective. And when Jeff first told me about it, I was just sort of like, well, brother, God bless you. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I've never seen, I've never seen this.
That's classic.
And the fun thing was I was speaking in Texas recently, and Jeff and I got together. We hadn't seen each other for years, and you probably know we wrote a book together on called The Same-Sex Controversy, and
Yeah, it was a great book.
Just a dear friend, and just so neat to see that in many ways we've followed the same path, but just on different parts of the path, in essence, to where now, we're so close. When I finally became a post miller, I talked to Jeff on the phone. He said, well, it took you long enough. It's nice to have friends like that you can talk about.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he wrote a chapter in one of the books that you wrote a chapter in, Doug, years ago on baptism. And I have a chapter in a Reformed Baptist book responding to that book in response to Jeff.
Yeah.
So, and there's someone in our group right now that I owe a further response to, and we'll be getting to after the Thanksgiving holidays. So that has to happen along.
Maybe.
I thought.
Yeah, maybe.
I thought there's a time limit. It's like chess. Like your time's over. You can't.
I'm afraid once you get to Doug and I's age, there ain't no time limit.
That's right. It's whatever you can do.
Don't wait too long. If you wait too long, the baby grows up.
So, but yeah, I think we do need to think about what gives us true small c Catholicity without a faux ecumenism.
Right.
And from my perspective is the more passionate you are for the central main defining things, the more grace you'll be able to extend in the areas where there's disagreement. That's been my experience.
Right. And C.S. Lewis points out somewhere that when a non-believer is converted to Christianity, he's almost never converted to the margins of liberal soft Christianity.
Right. Why bother?
Why bother? Eugene Genovese once said when he was an atheist, whenever he was talking to a liberal churchman, he said, I always held that deep, assured feeling that I was in the presence of a fellow unbeliever. Right? And so if an atheist or someone who's out there becomes a Christian, they're going to go all the way.
Right.
And if they go all the way, they're going to go all the way into a particular communion. Right? So when Rosaria Butterfield converted, she recognizes the Evangelical Center and is truly ecumenical in all the right ways. But she has decided convictions that govern how she worships and what they do, the psalm singing and whatnot. And so what we have to do, and this would go back to Ian Murray's book Revival and Revivalism, where the beating heart of a non-wimpy or liberal ecumenicity has to be gospel. It's got to be gospel. Man's plight, God's solution, the sovereignty of God, the substitutionary death of Christ on the cross, and that when that uncorks, is going to be Reformation and revival. That's the only thing that's going to do it.
Well, and included in gospel, I think, is in the present moment is this idea of the law as a portion of the lead up to the gospel, because. Right, so 100 years ago, it was the peculiar doctrines of Christianity that was the thing. It was Jesus' virgin birth, was the resurrection, a historical fact, bodily, and that sort of thing. And now it's the moral stuff. It's the law. It's the what Lewis called the Tao, abolition of man. Right. It's those things that are the actual objectionable piece. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of what Christians are struggling with is we knew. So when there was a widespread Christendom consensus about morals. Like Thomas Jefferson, when he was doing his scissor thing with the Bible, he was cutting out all the miracle stuff, but he was leaving all the ethical stuff. All of the moral teachings were intact because that was the good stuff. And that sort of held true for a long. They may not have always obeyed it, but they at least acknowledged that it was the law. Now, and so all of our triage of like what issues are central and what issues are peripheral was based on, you got to believe in the fundamentals, right? The historic resurrection and the penal substitution. Those things were the core. And then you worked your way out to your baptismal debates and your, cessationism debates, things like that. What threw it for a wrench, I think, for a lot of Christians was all of a sudden the world went mad on what it means to be human. and that moral and ethical stuff that we'd assumed that everybody agreed with, often believer and unbeliever alike, were at least on the general same page about that. When all of a sudden that was questionable, and there was a bunch of Christians who were countenancing it or tolerating it or appeasing it or coddling it, then that's what scrambled the division. What category does manhood and womanhood go in when you're triaging? That's a newer question. Like, that's not one that we had to adjudicate, because manhood and womanhood was sort of assumed as sort of like, well, the Bible teaches this. Everybody knows what a man is and what a woman is. When all of a sudden egalitarianism and feminism work their way in, when the sexuality stuff comes in, it's like, well, how do you, what level, is that a first-tier issue, a second-tier issue, a third-tier issue? Where does it belong? And I think people are working through that now.
So, James, you might be able to recall this from the difference between apologetics 20 years ago and apologetics now. It used to be that you would talk to unbelievers and everybody knew what God was, and the debate was over whether or not there was one, right? Mm-hmm. But we all know that there is a God or not, and if there is one, then he's this sort of being. Apologetics today, we're talking to people, we don't have to persuade them that there is a God. We have to persuade them that they are not that God.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right? People have deified themselves.
Right.
Very much so. But there's one other area that I think has remained constant. And I don't know if any of you have, you all have been busy burning stuff in November, so you probably haven't kept up with it. But the Evangelical Theological Society met.
Yes.
And they have elected a woman as their president now. But more importantly than that, I've been contacted by people who were there, and at least one very well-known apologist presented a paper calling for a fundamental revision of the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy. It needs to be updated.
Of course.
And when you listen to what needs to be updated, it is the idea of the specificity of biblical revelation. So William Lane Craig is doing his, Adam existed, but he was a caveman 500,000 years ago, and we really don't need to worry about this special creation stuff. And in fact, believing special creation is such an embarrassment in the world today, we can't do that. And that kind of rot, to be perfectly honest with you, is what infected all the mainstream, all the mainline denominations, and led to their eventual downfall. And now we're seeing it in ETS, and that's a constant. I think it may take different forms in different decades. It just seems to me that the constant always is, has God said? Right. Yeah. And it can be, has God said in a way we can understand, so we can have linguistic arguments about, can language actually communicate objective truth, stuff like that. But it all comes back down to, has God said? Has he preserved his word? Can we understand his word? Is this his word? That to me is the constant that I see boiling underneath everything. And it bubbles up in different places, in different forms. But I'm seeing it again. And sometimes we get tired of it, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. But we can't, because we have to pass on to the next generation a passion for the scriptures as God's self-revelation to us. If that just becomes some dead letter that we pass on, what are we doing to our kids? What are we doing to our church? What are we doing to the future?
Sure.
It has to be a passion.
There's a big quadrant of the evangelical world, professedly, self-confessedly, I'm an evangelical. There's a big slice of the evangelical world that is to the left of the liberals that Machen fought. Mm-hmm. Right? And Machen saw it coming, and those liberals took a stand for traditional ethics and that sort of thing. They just wanted to dispense with the miracles, like Jefferson. Right. But now the rot is far advanced in evangelicalism. We are in a worse state than the mainlines were when Machen took his stand. But no doubt they want to revise the statement on inerrancy so they can still tell their donors that we're strong on inerrancy. We right. affirm inerrancy. We've redefined all the words, but we affirm the words we've redefined.
Well, and that's the foresight of the founders of ETS, and sort of, I saw somebody on Twitter say that among doctrinal statements, the ETS doctrinal statement is like the bikini, because it's like two, it's like there's just, it's not, and among the wardrobe, it's like just the two statements, the Trinity and inerrancy. But by picking inerrancy, they picked one of the most disrespectable, like it'll get you laughed out of everywhere, right? And by doing so, it was a kind of disinfectant. It cleared stuff out, because if in order to get in, you had to be with the weirdos who believe that God has said. And
it's a very effective bikini.
It is. That's right. It's, yeah. But the challenge is for academics is that the lure of respectability is always a temptation, and so the search for the workaround, right? Okay, so how can I still affirm it, but find all of the ways to maintain my respectability so that I can be an inerrantist, but not that kind of inerrantist, which is the same thing that people do with complementarity. I'm a complementarian, but not that kind of complementarian. That's the first book. The second book is I'm neither complementarian nor egalitarian. The third book is I'm an egalitarian, and the fourth book is I'm affirming.
I'm an atheist.
Yeah, I'm an atheist, right? Yeah. So it's just the train runs the same. It's the same stops all along the way. So the thing for the ETS folks is going to be whether or not that desire for respectability wins out over the desire for fidelity. Like, are you going to be faithful? And right now, the play to expand is basically a play on the part of the liberals, I would think, for reinforcements. Because if they can expand it, then you can pull a bunch of other young academics in, and now how are the votes going to go, right? And so it really is a linchpin. Same thing that's happening with the Southern Baptists and their debates over women pastors is, if you're going to tolerate it, if you're going to allow that kind of rot on anthropology and on biblical authority then it's only a matter of time that you just set a clock, and the clock will actually tick faster, because once the liberals figure out, well, they did it in 40 years. We can do it. We can beat that. We can take this place down. We can move it in 20. We can move it in 10. And there's a huge momentum thing when you're just flowing with the current.
Yeah.
All right. So here's my other question on these lines. So we can build a school. You could build a school with the old Baptists and Presbyterians and Anglicans and everybody could get together and they could found a Christian school. Mm-hmm. They could be a part of building mere Christendom. That's the whole principle of mere Christendom, right? Mm-hmm. They would struggle to do a church, so CREC can maybe manage it with some really finely tuned principles and accommodations for different groups.
Right.
But in terms of the same congregation, it gets harder when you get to those divisions. What about a household? So recently, some of the things you said kind of circulated again about whether or not you would have been okay if one of your daughters had married a Baptist.
Right. And
you said, the little bit that I saw was no, I would neither they or I would have been okay with that. And so I'm just curious, and I think that this is actually a real live issue, I would guess, for a lot of folks watching, because the Christian dating scene is so gnarly as it is. The technology's messed it up.
You're just happy to find a guy who believes in God.
Exactly. Yeah. So
whatever the answer is, I'm definitely developing a dating platform.
That's right. I mean, there people are. This is a live issue, because what happens is, folks who really want to get married and they want to find someone faithful, and they don't want someone who's going to go woke, and yet then they find I'm a Baptist, I'm a Presbyterian, and it's how big of a deal is this? I've had this conversation numerous times with young 20, usually upper 20s, because they're trying to there's a clock ticking and they're trying to figure it out. So is it how do we think about building a household with those differing convictions?
The acid test is like, does the Baptist guy use a flamethrower or not? Isn't that the?
That's right.
I thought the actual question was specific and said Reformed Baptist. Wasn't that
yeah.
the case?
Yeah. Reformed Baptist, but here's the deal. Okay, the thing that circulated was a little thin slice, and there was a broader. Back
to the old context thing.
Yes.
You're always doing that. Man,
you do that with Hebrews 8. I don't want to hear nothing about that from you. It matters whether you're talking about your son or your daughter.
Okay.
Right? If your son is courting a sweet Baptist girl, and she has got decided convictions about Hebrews 8 and Ephesians 5, if she's willing to go with you, then she's willing to go. Right? She's going to be a sweet, submissive wife. And that has sort of the settlement of the issue baked in. If it goes the other way, if it's a Presbyterian girl with decided doctrinal convictions, she doesn't. She's not just going along for the ride, but she knows what she thinks and why she thinks it. She's agreeing to follow her husband, and when you go down the aisle, you're agreeing to submit to him in everything, right? Mm-hmm. So unless there's some sort of sacramental prenup.
Could we work one of those up? Could we work one of those up?
Jared just got an idea for a new website.
Prenup?
Yeah, but here
Jared's new side hustle is going to be
sacramental prenups. But see, the problem is there are Reformed Baptists who would be suitable for an arrangement, a marriage like this, because they are ecumenical. There would be Reformed Baptists who would not be suitable because they're ecumenical in a squishy sort of way. They have these convictions, but they don't really have them. You know, sure, I'll do whatever. Right. You know, whatever you want. You're cute. Mm-hmm. And then there is the hardline Reformed Baptist who is going to bring up this girl's kids as though they were heathens. Right. And so you've got people, and it'd be the same way with, there are some Paedo-Baptist Reformed churches that are so introspective, and they do with the Lord's Supper something comparable, where you've got a church of hundreds of people and only 17 people are taking the Lord's Supper. Well, would you let your daughter marry a godly young man from that church? Mm-hmm. Well, you don't want your grandkids growing up in the gloom. Right? So everything, it depends on the person, but as a general rule, I would say no. But I've been involved in situations where I've helped to broker something.
Yeah. James, how do you typically counsel folks when they're faced with this question of, and is it similar where if it's a son versus a daughter, that do you agree with Doug there?
Well, it's interesting, Doug and I debated the Paedo communion issue last year, or the year before, one of the two. We came really, really close. You know, I've baptized my granddaughters, and so they're not living in gloom. And so in that type of a situation, it was interesting. My son-in-law actually responded to the narrow context clip that was posted from what Doug was saying, and he said, "I wouldn't have any problem with that kind of a marriage." Is what he said regards his kids. And part of it, of course, I'm not sure if you've. In fact, I'd be interested, Doug, if you have seen the debate that my son-in-law did with Zach Lautenschlager.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah. Eric Yeager's his name. That's my son-in-law.
Yeah.
And he did a debate on who is in the new covenant. And of course, the interesting thing there is Zach's a member of Christ Presbyterian in Magna. It's the OPC church that we've done so much work with. It's unbelievable. If you've seen the debate that Jeff and I did with the atheists, where he did the radiator fluid thing.
Right.
If you've seen that was the moderator was the pastor of that church. And so we have all these connections where we work with each other and we do all this stuff. And I think that impacts the answers that are given. We don't see it as a marriage outside of the faith or anything along those lines at all. And so I don't think there would be as much of a, because the way that you put it, Doug, specifically in that clip was, I want them raised in the covenant. So obviously how you view that and what that means is going to have some weight on how you determine this. But I'll be honest with you guys. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I said back in 2016, and I'll say it again, in some ways, and call this an abandonment of the term if you wish, but in some ways, I'm not overly concerned anymore about being in the Reformed club. Because there are so many people who call themselves Reformed that are so focused on minutia that the main and plain and great things of what it means to be Reformed just get shoved off to the side. And sometimes we call them the truly Reformed, the TR, and not have anything to do with textual critical stuff, though we can talk about that too. It's a mindset that I find to be utterly inconsistent with the passion for the sovereignty of God, the passion for his grace, the passion for the gospel, where side issues become absolutely, completely definitional, and there is no willingness whatsoever to look beyond those things.
Right.
And so I could see people in my own quote unquote Reformed Baptist group. There are people that don't want me in that group. They would say I'm not truly in that group. I could see people that would have tremendous similarity with me, that I would be concerned about a marriage in that context, because there isn't a balance as to what really defines us as Reformed people.
Right.
If being Reformed makes you a miserable person to be around, I don't want any of my kids to end up, and my kids are obviously grown and beyond all this, but grandkids, to be stuck in a situation like that. So there's a lot of things to think about.
So with
It's almost as if to say Reformed is not enough.
he went there. So maybe to tie that in, agreement on. So there's one. Would you put this in like kind of the wisdom, the prudence bucket? These kind of things. It's not like you said. It's not like marrying an unbeliever where you'd just be opposed to it on the principle. This is much more of a wisdom call category, and the question is how wise or foolish is it?
Right.
Okay. So, and then if you had a situation where you've got, so let's go in it with a Presbyterian daughter, and you've got she's interested in, or a Baptist guy's interested in her, and she thinks he's okay, and you're trying to counsel her and work through it. If he's a hardcore Reformed Baptist who they don't baptize anybody until they're 18 years old. Right. And so there's that factor versus, I don't know, James, what's typical in your church in terms of like age of profession? You guys baptize younger?
I think, oh yeah. I was a part of a Reformed Baptist church that would have pushed for the much later time period. But at Apologia, I think probably the youngest that we've baptized, I think we had a young boy that was about 3.5, 4. Okay. Probably recently.
Right. And if I could interject something here, because we brought up our 3 kids when we were Baptists.
Right. I always tell people, if you want to know how to raise kids as a Baptist, you should just read Doug's stuff.
Because we were working it all out then. But our kids were all baptized and taking the Lord's Supper, such that now they can't remember a time when they weren't taking the Lord's Supper.
Right.
They were. Yeah. So they made profession of faith early, and we accepted it and brought them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Yep.
If you had a family like that, then I would say the hurdles are much more surmountable.
Right. Exactly. So I think that's the thing, is sometimes because there's such a wide range, there's a wide range among Paedo Baptists with communion and not, and then there's a range among Baptists based on, is it 3.5, 4, 5, 6, 7 young professing baptisms versus the more staunch when they're adults, when they can stand on their own 2 feet in the assembly.
And then you have to factor in the fact that when you have a young couple who are starry-eyed, they're really attracted to each other, they have a tendency to say nothing matters.
Right. Well, it'll all work out.
It'll all work out. Nothing. Finances don't matter. Ethnicity doesn't matter. Education levels don't matter. Nothing matters because we're in love with each other. Well, no, all of it matters.
Yeah.
All of it matters. And you're going to find yourself in 5 short years faced with problems that you did not anticipate. And part of the task of parents and grandparents is to walk young people through these things.
Right. And so because I think there'd be a way to thread some of those needles for people if the objection was something like on the Baptist side, Doug thinks it's really important that you raise your kids in the covenant. But if a Baptist were to come back and say, well, I don't think we're raising them in the covenant, but I do think we're required to raise them in the Lord, right? And Ephesians 6, raise your kids in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So if we're raising them in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, then I would guess you would, and it's a younger, the church practices, the 5, 6, 7-year-old.
Right.
Then there, like you said, it's a much lower hurdle, and you can say, I think you guys can thread this needle if you guys are serious about it and thoughtful about
we
it.
still have to work it out. But then on the other spectrum, one time I was talking to a Reformed Baptist acquaintance, and I said to him, "What do you do when your kids, unbaptized kids, what do you do when your kids pray?" Right.
Yeah.
Just volunteer. And he said, "Well, we don't discipline them for it."
Right.
I thought, what world am I in?
Yeah, right.
So if there are, and I've heard of situations where kids are spanked for praying because that's hypocrisy.
Right.
You're not a Christian yet.
Or the one I read about was if the kids are getting fussy in church, you lean over and you say, "Hey, the people of God are worshiping. You need to be quiet."
Right.
Right. And you're just kind of so that there's the stiff arm.
So that's the kind of thing, nothing doing.
Right.
Right. That kind of mentality, nothing doing. But the world is a big and complicated place, and I'm happy to talk with anybody, although all my kids are married. So
That's right.
but not all my grandkids.
This is basically taking the side trail that James, a door that James opened when he mentioned about these Reformed people, that there is a real problem. James, you've addressed this a few different times. I've seen you talk about it publicly, where people are getting super weird and combative about minor doctrines and insignificant things. And that's somewhat related to this conversation, because it's one thing to talk about this in the cloud. It's another thing to talk about it on the ground, like
Right.
when you're actually in a context, like where are you? And Bill Wallace of China, the missionary, I remember reading that biography way back in the day, and there was interdenominational stuff on the mission field, because you're like, as soon as you land there on the mission field, you're like, thank goodness this guy is a Christian.
Right.
Like, I don't, you can be an Anglican, whatever. And there's a problem with the advancement of, maybe some of it's social media. I'm not blaming social media, but people are not actually living out their convictions, and that's what's permitting them to be ridiculous and fight. Okay, like we have to. It's like a message to the Reformed evangelical world in America. Like, please start raising your children. Please start like worshiping in your church and building something locally. When you're actually doing it, you won't do the nonsensical things that you're doing. That really is a solution to so many of the things that we talk about on podcasts, is like, you have to go do it.
Yeah. I think we may have a question from someone.
Last question, just to wrap up. Given the big sort, all of the sorts that you mentioned,
Yeah.
just one word of advice for folks trying to figure it out, and then maybe do a Lewis book recommend from each of you would be interesting.
Ooh, okay. You want to go first?
Yeah, I better on
So-
the Lewis thing, because I think other people are going to say the book I want to say.
Okay.
So it's That Hideous Strength.
Okay, that hideous strength. What would you say to the piece of advice for folks trying to navigate the complexities of the great sort or sorts?
Yeah, the tough part is it's a big question, but in the main, there really is a sort going on, and you actually, especially men, so speak to men and fathers, the culture in which you raise your children matters. It's huge. And probably the biggest decision you're going to have to make is your family matters a lot, probably far more than you think. And the culture in which you're raising them matters a lot, probably far more than you think. And so you need to pray and get wisdom, because you can't live on the internet and get ideas and then not apply them and not baptize your kids in the vision that you're getting on the internet. So you watch Apologia, you watch stuff that comes out of Moscow, and you are seeing something. Like, you're really seeing something. You are seeing something new, something different, something that's going to be like, you're going to have to break a bone to get there. And you have to lead your family in it. You can't have this detachment. So the problem is,
Was it something somebody said?
yeah, all right, you're going to get me. Should you up and move? It's like, you have to do it by faith. You shouldn't do anything quickly, but if you are seeing things, the biggest thing you have to figure out is provision for your family, your immediate family, and then your broader family. Where is your broader family? I mean, if you're dealing with a generational situation, then that's that. But you're going to have to deal with the cultural context, and you have to be willing to make some risky decisions given the cultural landscape.
Okay. I'll go next because I don't want them to steal my books. Lewis book that I would recommend as actually right now, Silverchair. And the reason is that the bit at the end with Puddleglum's little speech to the witch underground, that whole scene, I think is one of the most profound analyses of what it means to live in the modern world. You know, just the way that unbelief kind of just falls upon you because like the way the music and the incense and the arguments, and then Puddleglum's courage and faith to be able to go stick his foot in the fire. And I just think the more that you can soak in that, the more you'll be equipped to resist it. I think my advice is something like, I agree with everything Jared said. I think getting the triage right on the relative balance or the relative triage of the baptism, Presbyterian, those older divisions, they still matter. They do matter. And there's practical, real church and family things that flow from them. But they're at a different level than the sort of cancerous anthropological errors that is rampant in our culture in the church. Those things are far more serious, grave. So if you think of if you think of triage, there's the things that you have to do to be a Christian at all. That's life. You got to believe in Jesus. You got to believe He rose from the dead. And then there's a whole category of health. And you can have a really healthy person, and you can have a really unhealthy person. And so if the baptism debate is over whether someone has a cold or not, the debates over manhood, womanhood, the feelings debate, the psychology debate, all of those things, that's serious cancer.
Enormous, yeah.
That's serious cancer. And so getting clear on I need to be so triaging right, and then going what community can I bring my kids into that's going to have a similar vision of that triaging, that's going to recognize the relative differences so that you avoid the wrong kind of fundamentals. It's ironic that I was talking with a friend who came out of fundamentalism, and he said he just seen it all over again. And the irony is that the people who are being most fundamentalistic in the vibe sort of way, like the secondary separation, we won't be friends with you because you're friends with that guy who's friends with that guy who's friends with, like that sort of thing, are the people who are about as far from the fundamentalist doctrinally as could be, right? But they're still doing that same separation. So you don't want to do that, but you've got to get your triage right. James, you got a piece of advice in a Lewis book?
Yeah, well, my book choice will be a book called "Son of God, Lord of Glory" by B.B. Warfield, because I'm not a C.S. Lewis expert, and I think it's an awesome book that most people haven't read, but they need to.
Say it again.
Son of God, Lord of Glory.
Son of God, Lord of Glory by B.B. Warfield. It helped me a lot in Warfield's material in the Doctrine of the Trinity. I think is just exemplary. It's wonderful stuff. So that way I won't embarrass myself by just going, well, I remember the space trilogy thing. That was pretty cool. So we won't do that. But as far as the great sort goes, the greatest sort is still coming. And I think one of the tragedies of Western culture is that we no longer believe that. In other words, I think one of the things that was used by God as common grace for so long to bless mankind was a universal recognition that there will be a day of judgment, that there is judgment coming. Men still know that in their heart of hearts, but we have just become absolute experts at expressing that. And once that is banished, that explains a lot of what you see on the internet today. I saw a video today of a woman holding a little baby and had a little rainbow thing going, "I just hope you're gay. I just hope you're gay. I want you to be gay." And I'm just sitting here going, what process can lead to that kind of absolute detestation of the beauty of what God has given us in creation and in human life? I mean, it is repeatedly over and over again this fundamental denial that we are the creatures of God and someday we will stand before Him and we will give an account. Without that recognition of the day of judgment, things get dark really, really fast. So that's what I would say is live in light of the fact that there will be the great sword, and it will be done in righteousness, and it will be done under the authority of one who knows perfectly because he lived a perfect life.
Amen. Doug, what you got?
So, amen, everything said so far. I would say, with regard to the great sort, I would say the fundamental thing is to make sure you're walking with God, confessing your sins, your family's healthy, your family home fires are addressed first. Then, as for husbands and fathers, as the head of your family, find a church that is pastored by vertebrates. There's no way to function in the turmoil that we're coming up on unless you're with like-minded people. You just have to basically, and if that means moving across the city, if that means an hour commute to church, but find a church that's healthy, where the Word of God is opened and exposited and applied. So that's the advice. Family, and then plug into the family of God. On the books, I would sneak in 2 books. So
You can do it.
Okay.
We'll allow it.
I would pair Abolition of Man and That Hideous Strength together. They were written at the same time. They address the same basic issue. One is a prose treatment of the fictional themes of the other. Not prose, fictional and non-fictional.
Yep.
And he's addressing the same basic things. And That Hideous Strength is one of the most prophetic, prescient bits of writing that I can imagine. And I've read it like 14, 15 times.
Start over.
And it's time to, and after, it's not only the book that I know I'm going to read again, but it's a book that after I go for a certain space of time, I need to read it again. There's a hunger for it. So, Abolition of Man, That Hideous Strength.
Very good. All right. With that, just a reminder that this week's books are God Rest You Merry. So if you're getting ready for Advent and you want a book of Christmas reflections from Doug, you can get that. And if you want to see what Nancy's spankings hath wrought, you can get Rachel's book, Loving the Little Years, for free right now. And of course, Future Men documentary just dropped last week. You can still get that on the Canon Plus app. And so until next week for our final No Quarter November, Doug Wilson and friends, love your family, love your neighbors, and hoist the colors high.